So let's go ahead and talk about lesson 3, which is configuring Webex hybrid calendar service. Kind of a fun one here. Very involved though. A lot of steps you have to go through to set up calendar service, hybrid calendar service. So here are the objectives we're going to look at. We're going to look at the general calendar service operation, Expressway-based calendar service connector, Google Calendar deployments in the cloud, and one button to push. Calendar service operation, first thing we're going to look at. So to simplify scheduling, your hybrid calendar service users have a couple of easy ways they can add meeting details to a calendar invitation. So one, they can type a keyword in the location field. As an administrator, you can choose what scheduling keywords should be used, right? So by default, you can use @Webex and @Meet in order to create a space in Webex Teams and then add join details for it. But those are the default ones. You don't have to use those within your own company. You can come up with custom words that you want to use. Use your on-premise resource management and conference hosting environment with the telepresence management suite. If you have TMS, you can leverage that as well. Power users can add :space after something if they want to create a Webex space. Like you can do Webex @Webex :space to add a Webex, or my room. You can do :my room. And that overrides, it will override the administrator default settings. So, for example, if you configured both @Meet and @Webex to create a space in Webex Teams, users can type @Meet :my room or @Webex :my room to schedule the meeting in their personal room instead. Note though that the :space is the actual modifier that users enter, and the hybrid calendar service names the space using the subject line of the invitation. Then you can also include a video address in the meeting body. So in addition to the scheduling keywords, the hybrid calendar service can parse a SIP URI or other video address from the body of a calendar invitation, even if it's not a Webex standard meeting, Webex personal room meeting, or Webex Teams meeting address. So when the address matches a supported format, the meeting appears in the invitees' meeting lists and meeting notifications in their Webex Teams app. Hold on one second. Sorry about that. I felt a sneeze coming on. I was sure I was going to blow the mic out here. But it didn't happen. It just burned, which is even worse. The meeting also appears in the list on any scheduled room or desk device that are enabled for the hybrid calendar service, and the devices show the green join button for one button to push just before the meeting starts. So meeting list and join buttons. The meeting list in Cisco Webex Teams lets users see upcoming meetings for the next 4 weeks. Users see a join button in the meetings list and a scheduled meeting notification 5 minutes before the meeting starts. Users can add Cisco Webex rooms and desk devices and Webex boards to a meeting in order to make conferencing resources available. If the device is enabled for hybrid calendar service, the green join button appears on the device. Hybrid calendar service enabled rooms and desk devices can show meetings to which they've been invited in the meeting list as well. When adding Cisco Webex meetings, join details to an invitation, the hybrid calendar service also includes a Skype for Business specific video address, which also works with Microsoft Teams. So Skype for Business / Microsoft Teams video address. Your calendar service users on Microsoft Exchange, Office 365, or Google Calendar can share their out-of-office status through Cisco Webex Teams. So when a user sets an automatic reply, other Cisco Webex Teams users in the organization can see if they're out of the office. In app mentions directed at the out-of-office user, in people spaces for that user, in search results for that user's name, and in the expanded people roster for a space. Changes to the status can take up to 20 minutes to update in Webex Teams, though. So just something to be aware of. So let's go ahead and look at Expressway-based calendar connector. And I say that specifically, you'll see why in just a little bit, and we'll address it tomorrow when we get into Office 365 integrations. So this diagram shows the components of hybrid calendar service architecture and where the Expressway-based connectors integrate the on-premise components with the cloud. The management connector is included in the Expressway-C base. You can use it to register an Expressway to the cloud and link the Expressway interface with the Webex Control Hub. The management connector plays an important role as the coordinator of all the connectors running on the Expressway server or cluster. It provides you with a single point of control for connector activities. The management connector enables cloud-based management of the on-premise connectors, handles initial registration with the cloud, manages the connector software lifecycle, and provides status and alarms if you have issues that need troubleshooting. For an HTTPS connection to be established between the management connector and the cloud, you must update the trust list on the Expressway-C connector host with certificates that were signed by certificate authorities in use by Cisco Webex Cloud. You can allow the Cisco Webex Cloud to upload CA certificates to the Expressway-C Trust Store automatically. Or in the case where security policies prevent the Cisco Webex Cloud from updating trust certificate authority. I don't think so. But you can manually upload the security certificates as well. So you have that option. You'll see that here in a little bit. The calendar connector is the on-premises component of the hybrid calendar service. The connector runs on Expressway-C host that you register to the Webex Cloud. The calendar connector acts like a broker between the cloud and your Microsoft Exchange or Office 365 when you're doing a hybrid Exchange deployment using Microsoft Exchange and Office 365. Used to be you had to use the connector also if it was just Office 365, but that's no longer true. Now you can do an Office 365 integration without using the connector on the Expressway-C. There's a connector you can actually install directly in the Office 365 cloud. This is important though. The connector does use what's called an impersonation role. Which you can restrict to a subset of users, and it uses Exchange Web Services to auto-discover where users are homed, to listen for notifications on a user's calendar, to retrieve information on a user's calendar items and out-of-office statuses, to populate meeting invitations with details of the Webex team spaces and Webex personal rooms. So there's a lot that's going on with that impersonation account. Very important you create that. It has to be an active email account within the Exchange environment. The hybrid calendar service is designed to minimize security concerns in a hybrid environment. The cloud cannot retrieve or access the Exchange credentials from the connector. The cloud has no direct access to Exchange through the connector, and the connector does not access any user email or contacts. The connector does not create search folders or other extra folders for the user. The connector is not an Exchange foreign connector. The connector does not interact with the Exchange Hub transport server. No AD schema extensions are required. So in production Exchange, the counter connector increases the CPU usage and load on the CAS and MBX servers. The impact on your Exchange environment will depend on your Exchange deployment, the number of configured users, the number of meetings that the hybrid calendar service updates per user hour, per user per hour, I should say, the size of calendars, web documents, Cisco does document a throttling policy designed to help manage the increased traffic. So you can reference that if you're in an environment where that might be a concern. Now, as I mentioned before, previously to serve Office 365 users, you had to install the calendar connector on an on-premise Expressway, which didn't make sense. Why do I have to have an on-premise server to service something that's in the cloud? This on-premise deployment was required if you didn't have a hybrid Exchange environment. But now you can choose to enable the cloud-based hybrid calendar service for Office 365 without that connector. With this service, hybrid Exchange environments have extra considerations. So if you're doing on-prem and Office 365, there are some things you want to consider. You can run the Expressway-based calendar connector on the cloud-based Office 365 service at the same time. Once you enable the cloud-based service, all Office 365 users who are not in any resource group automatically migrate to it. To test the migration on a subset of users, make sure that the rest of the Office 365 users are in a resource group, then enable the cloud-based Office 365 service. The calendar connector on the Expressway C serves both Exchange users and Office 365 users in multiple resource groups. The cloud-based service serves any Office 365 user who are not in a resource group as well. With the release of the cloud-based service for Office 365 users, you can now choose whether to deploy only the Expressway-based calendar connector, a combination of the calendar connector and the cloud-based service, or if you have no Microsoft Exchange users, deploy only the cloud-based service. The cloud-based service can scale beyond the 1,000 user limit for Office 365 users and is simpler to deploy and maintain, which you'll see come tomorrow. It does not service Microsoft Exchange users. If you deploy it alongside the calendar connector, your Office 365 users automatically move to the cloud-based service unless they're in resource groups. Each user's email address is in the calendar system must match their Cisco Webex Teams login address. To use @Webex, the address should also match the user's Webex account address. If it does not, users must associate their Webex personal room with Cisco Webex Teams in the app in order to use the @Webex function. Each Webex Teams user can only have one email address associated with only one hybrid calendar service integration. In other words, the hybrid calendar service will only process meetings from a single address for creating spaces, decorating meetings, showing the meetings list and join button, and sending one button push to push in order, can't talk today, sending the one button to push function to your video devices. But again, more on Office 365 will be covered in Chapter 9 tomorrow. So in order to set up and enable the calendar connector, there are 7 required steps and 6 additional steps that need to be configured. So don't let this overwhelm you too much. Of these 13 steps, only 7 of them are required. So step 1, required step, you have to create an impersonation account right out of the gate. You cannot do this without it. A custom throttling policy helps the calendar connector work more smoothly. You can add the hybrid calendar service to your organization and connect your Expressway to the Webex cloud. This creates a resource in the Webex Control Hub and downloads connector software to the Expressway. Step 4 is optional. If you want Microsoft Exchange Web Services traffic to be encrypted, make sure the Expressway trust list contains the certificate of the CA that signed the Exchange server certificate. Step 5 is configure Exchange server for the calendar connector. Step 6 is optional. If you have a Cisco WebEx meeting site, configure the @Webex functionality. That's configured by default. That's if you want to change the keywords. Step 7 is also optional to override how the calendar connector localizes meeting join details for your entire organization. You can set the default language, which may already be set in Webex Control Hub, and you may want to just continue to use that default language. Step 8 is also optional to change the action that the calendar connector takes when entering @Webex or @Me. You can set keyword settings in the Webex Control Hub. Then step 9 is required. 9 and 10 are both required. You want to start the calendar connector and then enable the hybrid calendar service for users. Step 11 is optional if you want one button to push functionality to be provided to room and desk devices and Webex boards that are registered to the Webex Control Hub. Then you want to configure places for your devices. Step 12 is optional for one button to push on the Webex room and desk devices and Webex boards. Make sure that meeting scheduler have their Webex personal room associated with the Webex Teams account. And then finally, and I guess you could call the last one optional too, test one button to the push with room or desk devices or Webex boards. Testing's always a good idea. I don't like to call it optional, but I guess technically you don't have to test it. You can just assume it's going to work right. Not a great idea, but there it is. All right, so let's walk through these steps. Step 1 is to create an impersonation account. You must choose a mail-enabled account to use as the service account. It has to be an actual active account. It does not have to be an administrator or even a user in your organization. You can create a dummy account if you want, which is actually probably a pretty good idea. Because if people leave the company and their email is set up as the impersonation account, then their email has to remain active, right? And that could be problematic. So, couple key notes here. You do not want to use an impersonation account that is used by other services such as Unity Connection or TMS XE and so on. If you limited the set of users that are synchronized with Active Directory using LDAP filters, you may want to limit the impersonation by using a new or existing management scope in Exchange. So how do you set this up? First thing you want to do is sign into the server on which Exchange Management Shell is installed. Sign in with one of the following accounts, either an account that is a member of the Enterprise Admins group or an account that can grant permission on Exchange objects in the configuration container. Run a command in the Exchange shell that adds a new management role assignment. The role name is the name that you want to give the assignment. For example, calendar connector account would be a role name you could use. The name that you enter for role name appears when you run the get management role assignment command. Service username is the name of the account you select in the domain alias format. A custom throttling policy helps the calendar connector work smoothly. There's what a throttling policy is and what it is not. I think you can figure out which graphic to follow. One is used for parenting, and the other one's used for the calendar integration. So, in Exchange Server 2013 and 2016, the policy removes EWS limits from the impersonation account to avoid max concurrency issues. In Exchange Server 2010, the policy overrides the default policy. The default is tailored for user load, not for an enterprise application. So in Exchange Management Shell, you want to create the policy, depending on what version of Exchange you're running. So you want to enter the appropriate command for that. And I have those listed for you in the student guide. Then if you're using Exchange Server 2013 or 2016 and the impersonation account does not have a mailbox, then you want to run the enable mailbox for the impersonation account command. Step 3 is to apply a new policy to the impersonation account. So you want to run the set throttling policy association command. And then step 4, you want to confirm that the mailbox is using the new policy. So you want to run the get throttling policy association identity command. And then on each Exchange 2010 server that has a CAS role, CAS, you want to restart the Microsoft Exchange RPC client access service. So that's just on Exchange servers 2010. All right, so Cisco Webex hybrid services use software connectors hosted on Expressway-C to securely connect Cisco Webex to your organization's environment. So use this procedure to register your Expressway-C resources to the cloud. After you complete the registration steps, the connector software is automatically deployed on your on-premise Expressway-C. So from the customer view in the Webex Control Hub, go to Services, and choose one of the following. If this is the first connector host you're registering, click Setup on the card for the hybrid service you're deploying, and then click Next. If you've already registered one or more connector hosts, click View All on the card on the hybrid for the hybrid service you're deploying, and then click Add Resource. The Cisco Webex Cloud rejects any attempt at registration from the Expressway web interface. So you do not want to initiate setting up your connectors from the Expressway. You always want to initiate from Webex Control Hub. Then you want to choose the method to register Expressway-C. So again, you could choose new Expressway or existing Expressway, and it just depends on if you've set up any other connectors before or not. Then you click Next for new registrations. Click the link to open your Expressway-C, and then you can sign in. It'll prompt you to sign in to Expressway-C in order to load the connector management windows. Now, I talked to you about certificates before. You do want to decide on how you want to update your Expressway-C trust list. You can, as long as your company firewall policies and so forth allow it. You can let the Webex Control Hub update all the certificate information, which is really the easiest way to do this. And if you want to do that, you just check this box right here. I want Cisco to manage Expressway CA certificates required for this trust, and Control Hub takes care of all of it. Certificates expire, it'll update with new certificates. It does everything. It's a beautiful thing. That's the way Cisco recommends it, right? But there are people within their environments, they have to manage their own certificates and so forth. And so you can uncheck that box and you can actually choose to manage your certificates yourself, right? And then you have to go in and do all that. I'm not showing you how to do that. I'm assuming here moving forward that you're doing this the easy way. You're letting Webex Control Hub manage your certificates and that this box is checked. Then you click Next. And then you see a screen that looks like this. You want to check the box that says Allow Access to the Expressway. This gives the Webex Control Hub permission to download the necessary connectors and to go ahead and monitor them and so forth. So then you want to click register after you've redirected to the Webex Control Hub. Read the on-screen text to confirm Cisco Webex identifies the correct Expressway C. After you verify the information, click Allow to register the Expressway C for Webex Control Hub service. Registration can take up to 5 minutes depending on the configuration of the Expressway, whether it's a first-time registration or not. But even in a first-time registration, I've never seen it take 5 minutes. Could take 5 minutes, I guess, but I haven't seen it. So this is what you're going to see right here. After the Expressway C registers successfully, the Cisco Webex hybrid service window on the Expressway C shows the connectors downloading and installing. So you'll see first the management connector, it'll say downloading. Then you'll see whatever other connector you're installing. In this case, it's the calendar connector. So it'll say calendar connector installing. And then management connector will change to running. But calendar connector hasn't been configured yet, so it's just once it finishes installing, it's just going to say not configured. And then you have to click on stuff over here to configure it and then enable it, and then it'll change to running also eventually. We're getting to those steps coming up, so let's not run ahead. So each connector installs the interface pages that you need to be able to configure and activate that connector. This process can take a few minutes, and that's why they say it could take up to 5 minutes, right? Again, I've never seen it take 5 minutes, just a few usually. When the connectors are installed, you can see new menu items on the application hybrid service menu of your Expressway C. So up here at the top, you can go to applications, go down to hybrid services, and you'll see menu options there that didn't appear before. You can also use these hyperlinks over here to get where you need to go to configure these settings. Either way, they take you to the same place. All right. All right. So let's go on to the next slide. If you opted to have Cisco Webex manage the required certificates, then you do not need to manually append CA certificates to the Expressway C trust list. This is why the trust page is shown in this slide. Optionally, however, if you want to verify certificates presented by the Exchange server, then the Expressway trust list must contain the certificate of the CA that signed the Exchange server certificate. The CA certificate may already be in the trust list, so use this procedure on each Expressway cluster to check the list and append the certificate if necessary. If you're using a custom domain, make sure that you add the CA certificate for that domain certificate issuer to the Expressway. And if you don't know how to do so already, I've included some steps in the student guide that'll walk you through how to append those certificates. I'm not going to cover those now, though. So what you want to do now that your calendar connector is installed is you want to set it up for hybrid services. The connector will not start automatically because, as I said before, it does require some configuration first. So from the Expressway connector host, go to Application, Hybrid Services, Calendar Service, Microsoft Exchange Configuration, or just click on Configure Microsoft Exchange Servers, takes you to the same page, and then click New. Once you've clicked New, all you'll see is the top section of this at first. And so what you want to do is enter the credentials of the service account you want the calendar connector to use to connect to Exchange. The service account queries calendars on behalf of your users using that impersonation account. And so you can use the formats username at domain.com, or you can do like user principal name if you want as well. Most people just do username at domain.com. Then you want to enter a unique display name for the Exchange server. For the type, select Exchange on-premise for Exchange 2010, 2013, or 2016. Then for need proxy for connection, select yes. If HTTP access goes through a web proxy to your Exchange environment. For enable this Exchange server, select yes. You can select no for debugging purposes, but users will not be subscribed to this Exchange. So just choose yes. Then check a value for the authentication type. For added security, Cisco does recommend NTLM for 2010 or later on-premise Exchange servers. For hybrid Exchange or on-premise and Office 365 deployments, check both NTLM and basic authentication types. If one method fails, then the other method will be used. Then you want to leave the TLS verify mode as the default value, which is on, so that this Expressway C verifies the certificate that the Exchange server presents. You may need to update the trust stores on both servers to ensure that each one trusts the CA that signed the other certificate. Then under Discovery, select User Auto Discover to enable Auto Discovery. The Calendar Connector queries to find one or more Exchange servers, then configure the extra fields that are related to Auto Discovery. Choose whether to enable SCP record lookup. Enter the Active Directory domain to query for the SCP record. Select a query mode to control which directory access protocol that Calendar Connector uses to query Active Directory. Enter an email address so the Calendar Connector can test the auto discovery process. And then click Add. And once you click Add, the Calendar Connector automatically populates any missing auto discovery redirect URLs that it finds while connecting the auto discovery service. URLs from unauthenticated sources are placed in pending state and blocked unless you choose to allow them. If you skip the step now, you can still go back and manually add URLs later or explicitly accept or deny the pending URLs. Then you want to click Add to store the Exchange server configuration on the Expressway connector host. The Calendar Connector tests the connection to the Exchange environment and notifies you if there are any pending auto discovery redirect URLs to review. Optionally, if your organization has multiple user email domains, Cisco does recommend that you test the auto discover configuration with a user address from each email domain to ensure that the process works for all of them. To test another address, change the value to the email address field of the email address field to a different address, and then click Save. This is kind of an optional setting right here. You can configure the Exchange settings, configure the details of your Webex meeting sites. If you have more than one Webex site, do these steps for each site and then set the default site to the most, the one with the most users. I don't know how deep in this I want to get into because this is just optional. So if you want to know how to do this, I've got instructions for you in the student guide. Walk you through how to set this up. But again, this is optional. And this is only really if you have multiple sites, then you can set them all up in there and then claim one as the default. All right, in Cisco Webex Control Hub, the default language setting controls the language of the join details that Hybrid Calendar Service adds to invitations. If you leave the setting at its default, the service uses the language from the item.culture property of each meeting invitation. To override choosing languages on a meeting-by-meeting basis from item.culture, choose a specific language to use for join details of all meetings across your organization. So again, this is an optional thing. You do this from the Webex Control Hub. It's not required. If you want to know how to do this, I've included steps on how to set that up for you as well. Now you need to start the, oh, I'm sorry, I'm on the wrong one. Configure at Webex and at Meet keywords. Again, another optional thing by default. When users add at Webex to a meeting location, the calendar service updates the meetings with the Webex personal room details. When a user adds at Meet, by default, the service updates the meeting with the Cisco Webex team space details. As an administrator, you can change these default actions for either keyword. Regardless of how you set up these actions, though, power users can add the modifier :space or :myroom to specify the action for either keyword. So, for example, adding at Webex :space causes the service to update the meeting with Webex team space details. You want to know steps on how to change these keywords. This is done from the Webex Control Hub also, and those steps are included in the student guide. Now, to start the calendar connector, this is done from the Expressway C connector host. And you can do this task before you configure the calendar connector links in your Exchange environment and Webex environment. But all tests will fail until the calendar connector is running, and you may need to restart the connector after configuration. So from the Expressway, go to Applications, Hybrid Service, Connector Management. And the connector management section of the page has a list of connectors and the status of each. The management connector is running, and the calendar connector is not enabled, right? So then you want to click Calendar Connector, select Enable from the active drop-down list, and then click Save. The calendar connector starts, and then the status will change to running once the services are all running. Then you want to enable the hybrid calendar service for your users. This is done in the Webex Control Hub. You can use this procedure to enable a small number of Cisco Webex users for the hybrid calendar service with Microsoft Exchange or Office 365. But again, there is a way you can use the CSV file to do a bulk template for multiple users. So the steps here, just really this is what you want to do to like maybe test it on a couple users, make sure it's working before you do it for everybody. From the Webex Control Hub, go to the Users menu, choose a specific user from the list, and then click Edit, and then ensure that the user is assigned at least one paid service under License Configuration Services. Make changes if you need to, and click Save. Then click the calendar service, toggle on calendar, and choose Microsoft Exchange, and then save your changes. After you activate the service, the user status changes from pending activation to activated. The length of time for this change depends on the number of users you're enabling for the service. I've seen this one take a while. This is one that it could happen quickly, within a minute or two, or it could happen in an hour. I've seen it take up to an hour to enable these services. So you never know. You're very dependent on the back end of Webex at this point. Users do receive an email that indicates the feature's been enabled for them. You can see, that's it. All right. So once you've done this, then calendar service is enabled for the user, and they can start using the at Webex, at Meet commands. Real quick, let's talk about Google Calendar deployments in the cloud. This diagram shows the components of hybrid calendar service and Google Calendar architecture. A user creates a meeting in Google Calendar, putting a scheduling keyword or video address in the location field. Google sends a notification to the hybrid calendar service. The hybrid calendar service requests and receives the encryption key and then uses it to encrypt the meeting information. The hybrid calendar service validates meeting creation and receipts, and then creates a Webex team space if applicable. The hybrid calendar service calls the API service and maps the meeting to the space. The hybrid calendar service retrieves the meeting join information, including the personal room, if applicable. The hybrid calendar service updates the meeting invite with the meeting join information, and if applicable, the space ID. The updated meeting information then appears in Google Calendar. To deploy hybrid calendar service with your Google Calendar environment, you just need to perform these tasks. We're not going to go into detail about these. This is just a high-level overview. Register your Google Calendar environment to the Webex cloud. Test the connection and set the default Webex site. Optionally, to change the action that the hybrid calendar service takes when users enter at Webex or at Meet, you can set the keywords in the Webex Control Hub as mentioned before. Optionally, if you want one button to push functions to be provided to cloud registered room and desk devices, and Webex boards configure places for devices, and optionally for one button to push on Cisco Webex rooms and desk devices and Webex boards, make sure that meeting schedulers have their personal rooms associated with their Webex Teams accounts. Then test the Google Calendar and hybrid calendar service integration. So most of these are optional. The first two and last one are really the only ones that are required here in these steps. Real quick on one button to push, we're almost through this. I'm just going to push on. I know we're a little bit past the top of the hour. Apologize for that. We'll finish up here shortly if you guys can hang with me. This slide just illustrates the components needed for one button to push integration with meeting scheduling. Scheduled through the calendar integration, the cloud registered endpoints. Notice that there are not any more components needed outside of what's required for the calendar integration itself. By contrast, this slide illustrates all the components needed for one button to push integrations with meetings scheduled using the calendar integration and on-premise registered endpoints. The Expressway core and edge servers are required for firewall traversal, and TMS is required for scheduling one button to push for the CUCM registered endpoints. This infrastructure is required beyond the necessary components used for just the calendar integration. This is why everybody's pushing to the cloud, right? So to provide one button to push to Cisco Webex room and desk devices and Webex boards when scheduling Webex personal room meetings, users must have their personal room associated with their Webex Teams account. And this can happen in one of a couple ways. The Webex site is managed on Webex Control Hub. The users on your Webex site have been Cisco Webex Teams linked. User associated the personal room is Cisco Webex Teams. Users associate the personal rooms with Webex Teams for themselves. And then in order to test user accounts that you'll use to verify the setup, to check whether personal room associated needs to be added, you can sign into the Webex Teams app, go to meetings, and under my personal room, if the personal room link is missing, then you want to enter it in the format of https://company.webex.com/meet/username, or you could just drop the HTTPS off the beginning. Just do company.webex.com/meet/username. Then enter your host PIN and select save. If the link was missing, have users who will schedule meetings that include room or desk devices or Webex boards associate the personal rooms with the Webex Teams themselves, and that should resolve the issue. So use these steps to set up a test meeting and verify one button to push on registered devices. To test a Webex Teams meeting in Exchange or Office 365, in Outlook, Outlook Web Access, or https://mail.office365.com. You can create a new meeting and then add a keyword such as @webex:// or @meet to the location field. Go to the scheduling assistant and click on the add room and choose the device you want to add. Fill out other meeting information as needed and then send the invitation. When the meeting is scheduled to begin, verify that the join button appears on the device. When you're scheduling this as a test, you may want to schedule it to start in like 10 minutes. I have found that if you do it in 5 minutes, things don't always work right. So always do like 10 or 15 minutes ahead. to test a personal room meeting in Exchange or Office 365. In Outlook, Outlook Web Access, or Office365.com, create a new meeting and then add at Webex to the location field. Go to the scheduling assistant and click add room. Choose the device you want to add. Fill out the meeting information as needed and then send the invitation. When the meeting is scheduled to begin, verify the join button appears on the device, and that confirms it worked. And that is the end of hybrid calendar integration.